Welcome everyone to today's webinar on using AI to help learners get past learning plateaus. I am Louis Johnson. I have with me here Karen Jiang, and we've been working together in coming up with solutions to help students overcome barriers that they encounter in learning English. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself, say a few introductory words?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen. I'm really happy to have you join us on this, I think, really exciting and breakthrough innovation for language learning. I've been in the language learning field and its use of technology around it for quite a few years. So very, very excited to be able to have the chance to talk to you about what we've created.
So I'll play the slides and you speak to them, Karen. Just let me know when you want to move forward, okay?
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, we're talking about an area that if you've ever tried to learn anything, it's reaching that, what I call the intermediate plateau. You know, I Googled, you know, learning plateau and language learning, and I came back with 12 million hits. So clearly this is not a subject that is new to any of us. And it's, if you've ever tried to learn anything from language to a sport to any skill, you'll recognize that you tend to get to a level and you kind of feel stuck. And you're kind of unsure about what to do next. Louis, go ahead. So, you know, as I've been saying, you know, intermediate learners are generally the ones that encounter these plateaus. I mean, it's no secret as to why when you start to learn something, that at the beginning level, regardless of how you go about it, you get really excited and you feel like you're making very rapid progress. But at some point, you feel like, okay, I'm here now. Now what do I do? So this feeling of frustration and feeling discouraged, and often this is why people give up, particularly in language learning. So if you analyze, for example, language learning material sales, huge sales at the first two levels, but by the time you get to level 3 and 4, it starts to drop off. But the problem is in language learning, if you can't get past that plateau, you're not really able to use language at a level that's going to really be meaningful for you, whether it's academically or workplace or just for general English. So, you know, what are some of the reasons that people kind of get stuck here? Well, one of the things is that we tend to do the same thing over and over again. You know, we need to learn how to break the routine, particularly in language learning. So if we're kind of on a track in level 1 and level 2 at the beginning levels, we tend to follow the same process and the same procedure and thinking that, oh, it got me to this level, so if I keep at it, it's going to get me to the next level. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. You need to have more exposure in language learning to more authentic language. But the problem is that you often get discouraged in this particular area because you try, you get out there, and then you realize, I don't really have the vocabulary, or I don't have the fluency, or I don't have the confidence. And so after you get discouraged a few times, the tendency is then you revert back and you say, okay, well, I'm not there yet. Now what do I do? So it becomes an extremely frustrating and discouraging process. So what can we do using technology to help get ourselves, if we're learning a language, or our students unstuck, if you will, in language learning? Go ahead, Louis. You know, for those of you in language learning, I'm sure you've heard of Jack Richards before. He's a very prolific author and has been in the field for a very long time. And the area that we find that we get most frustrated with often is around speaking skills, okay? When I was learning Spanish, for example, In the beginning, I was hugely excited because with my limited vocabulary, my limited grammar, I could go out and do basic things, and I was all excited. I'm on my way to fluency. And then I would get myself in situations that required more than the basics that I had, and people sort of stopped understanding me, and I thought, oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was. So, fluency increases at the expense of complexity. So what I did instead was I would keep on babbling, but my use of language remained at the elementary level. But I would just talk more, and I would just talk faster, and I would try to find ways to compensate for my limited basic ability in language. And so I realized after a while that I was using phrases that really weren't conversational. They were kind of things that I had memorized, and I would use the same phrases over and over again, and I would make the same errors over and over again, because when you get to that intermediate level and you can kind of communicate, people aren't going to really correct you. So whoever you're conversing with, unlike when you're at the beginning level, they're not going to say, huh? What did you mean? What did you say? Or that vocabulary word doesn't mean anything. People just let you go on and on. Okay? Go ahead, Louis. So, this is, as I said, a well-known problem. Whether you're looking at it from a language or non-language skill. I mean, there have been studies upon studies that show that this is a persistent problem. Louis, do you want to make any comments about this particular slide?
Yeah. Sure. So what we did to understand what are the problems that these intermediate learners face is we looked at annotated recordings of learners at the intermediate level. And we also analyzed data that we collect from learners on our Enskill platform. And I'll talk about the latter in a moment, but I want to just bring up this example here. So this was a recording of a couple of students. One is they're both intermediate students. One is at the B1 level, and the other is at the B2 level. And you can see a little bit about how they vary in terms of their progression. See if I should be able to just click this now, and it should come up. Yeah, here it goes. So I'll play a little bit of this.
I think your girlfriend must have.
Well, I think she hasn't. No, she must be, well, good looking, of course, but this is not the most important. She has to be fun. She has to have a great sense of humor, her personality must be really cool, She can be shy, but it's, well, when a girl is shy,
Yeah.
You know this?
I know.
So you see here, he's able to put words together, but he's getting stuck. He's at a loss for words. He hesitates a lot. And so he's struggling with the fluency and gets points where he's not able to proceed. So one thing that this told us is that one thing we need to do is help students to improve their fluency, but not at the expense of complexity and accuracy, is what Richards was talking about. So we also looked at what training programs to help native speakers improve their speaking skills. And we found some points there that actually apply to language learners, particularly at the intermediate level. Karen, you want to say something about that?
Sure. So Matt Abrams, who is a professor at the Stanford Business School, talks a lot about, the ability to think fast and talk smart. So, in the ability to communicate well, it's not just about the jumble of words that you might learn. It's the ability to actually form thoughts and to speak and deliver your message efficiently and effectively. And I think the point we're trying to make here is that although we are talking today more specifically about language learners, this is a problem that we as native speakers faced as well. One of the key areas that we all face is that we get nervous, right? So, before this presentation, I was going through in my head as well, what am I going to say? Okay, I know the words. Am I going to deliver it in a way that is going to make sense to you, the audience? And so anxiety is real, okay? I think, we as teachers can say to students, oh, don't be nervous. It's okay, go ahead. But that's reality. Reality is that when you're speaking in a second language or you're speaking in your native language, in certain situations, you feel anxiety and you have to learn in a way to kind of overcome that anxiety, but you need to recognize it. And so we talk about delivery structures. Delivery structures are the way that we frame what we're going to say. So Abrams looks at it in this way. Now, what do you want to say? So what? Why is it important what you're saying? Now, what are you going to do with it? Now that you figured out what you're going to say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the solution that your dialogue is trying to solve? And what's the benefit? So in other words, as I was said, apart from the words itself, you need to think about how you're going to deliver something. And we do this instinctively as native speakers in our own language, but in a second language, delivery structures become even more important because you have anxiety, you're worried about, do you have the right language? So you need to practice and you need to learn how to frame your message in the appropriate way. Do you want to add anything to that, Louis?
Yeah, well, and I think that this is one of the hallmarks of being able to communicate at a high, intermediate, or advanced level. The ability to put ideas together into structured arguments. So yes, native speakers struggle with this, but intermediate speakers struggle with it that much more. And so this really came to us as something that, well, we need to focus on this and see if we can use technology to help learners to be able to put together structured arguments and practice doing that effectively. So in fact, that's where we has been our current focus in the ongoing development of our of Alelo's Enskill platform. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, it is an AI-driven learning platform. We use AI in a bunch of different ways as part of that. So, people talk about AI, what is that and what does that have to do with learning? Well, we find that actually we can use AI in multiple ways. First of all, as you will see, we can create avatars that you can have a conversation with, an unscripted conversation. And so that gives learners an opportunity to practice in a safe environment to build self-confidence and get over any anxiety that they might be feeling. But at the same time, our AI algorithms are analyzing the learner's responses and providing feedback on how well they're doing in a number of different dimensions. And then to encourage learners to keep practicing and improving, but also then to select personalized instruction in the particular areas where learners are having difficulty. And then finally, the data, the analytics that the platform is collecting can be useful as well for teachers and administrators, lots of stakeholders, to understand how well learners are doing, and that can also help improve teaching if the teacher understands clearly where the students are having difficulty. So So this provides benefits for learners and for teachers. The learners gain self-confidence. They get opportunity to practice in realistic situations. They come to class better prepared, and so the classroom instruction is more efficient and more effective as well. So I'll say a little bit now about how we have been extending the AI to support intermediate level learners and helping them to continue to improve. So one thing is to develop the conversational AI so that it really can support fluent conversations. And the point that I want to make is that what we're doing with AI is very different from, say, if you've used Siri or Alexa, you can ask Siri or Alexa a question and you can get a transactional response. But you can't have a conversation with Alexa or Siri. You can't have an ongoing discussion where one idea falls from the other. And so as students progress to higher levels of proficiency, they naturally get engaged in connected conversation, and so the technology needs to support that. So for example, here is an example from a simulation where the learner is supposed to buy a train ticket. And so what you see on the top left is a transcript of what the learner said and what the avatar said. Now, this conversation could have been at a very transactional level. You know, the ticket lady could say, where are you traveling to? And the learner could say, New York. And the ticket lady could say, when would you like to depart? And the learner could say, May 7th. But that's not the way real fluent conversation goes. I mean, you see, here are some examples of the way fluent conversation would really go in this context. Like, well, good morning. I'm interested in buying a ticket to New York, please. Oh, I'm thinking of leaving on May 7th. What do you have available that day? And then the ticket lady responds, oh, I have a couple of trains that day. So part of what we then have been aiming is to give students the opportunity to practice real conversation with simulated native speakers. I mean, it's like the experience of interacting with a native speaker, except that if you need a transcript, it's available. If you get stuck, you didn't understand, you can ask the avatar to repeat what they said. So the supports are there for as long as the learners need them. But if they keep practicing, then they won't need all of that and they can just engage in free conversation.
Louis, could I just interject one thing
Absolutely.
here? So if you think back to the tools that have traditionally been available to us as language teachers, you know, we obviously have moved beyond sort of reading rote conversations in textbooks. We have role plays, but you know, if you've ever tried to set up a role play in your class, you know there's limitations as well. Basically, you're still reading off of a script, and if you put two students together, you have different levels of students, and some students will not be able to respond in an authentic fashion. You think about things that we do in language labs that where we're trying to get students to engage in more meaningful conversation, but a lot of it ends up being listen and repeat, listen and repeat. Even with the advent recently of artificial intelligence and technology, a lot of what's available is not really a full multi-turn conversation. It will go on for maybe 2 or 3 lines, but 2 or 3 lines of conversation usually in the real world do not end up getting us what we want. If you think back to the slide that we showed about delivery structures, you know, you have something you're trying to accomplish, and at the very end you need a solution. So what simulations like this have been able to do is to take you all the way through from that beginning problem or challenge or goal that you have all the way through, simulate all the way through to your solution. but in a natural kind of way, where students, as Lewis has said before, can practice in a very safe environment, but using authentic language. Go ahead, Lewis.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we do then, or what the software does then, is at the end of the conversation, the learner gets feedback on how well they did. And following what Karen's point, so like this particular conversation here took, the total time was 4.5 minutes. So that's what real conversations are like. They're not just like 2 or 3 turns, like what Karen was talking about. So what we can do here, or what the software can do, is measure fluency here in terms of the number of conversational turns per minute on average, but also look at the learner's ability to actually communicate and achieve the objectives of the conversation. So for example, if the student doesn't ask enough questions about departure and arrival times, then that's something that the system will pick up on and suggest, here are some language areas where you should practice some more. And then what the platform encourages learners to do is to keep practicing, to get more comfortable. As they practice, they will their fluency will increase, but Enskill also selects practice exercises in the particular areas where they seem to be having problems with language.
I think an important, sorry, Lewis, I think an
Please.
important point to make here is that when the student goes back to practice, it doesn't mean that the student needs to or should use exactly the same language they used before. And the avatar doesn't necessarily respond in exactly the same way as they did before. So the student is constantly enabled to try out different language, to see how a native speaker, which in this case is the avatar, might respond to it. So this is much more like practicing in the real world. There are programs where you are kind of forced to use the same language in input and you get the same output, but in this case, this is not the way it's designed. Sorry, Lewis.
No, don't apologize. Yeah, these are very, very important points. And as we'll see, actually, the simulations we create encourage learners to think about how to phrase what they want to say better in order to get their point across. We'll see that in a moment. So a question came up, how do you distinguish between a language error and just forgetting to ask the question? Well, a couple of things. First of all, we provide suggestions of what the learners might talk about. So if they forget to ask something, well, then they can go and see, oh, here's what would be a good thing to talk about here. So in the conversations at this level, the primary focus is making sure that students are able to get their points across. But as we'll see, there are additional practice exercises as well as advanced simulations where the way that you present your ideas has an impact on your score. And so we'll see a couple of different examples of that. So what I just wanted to show you here is example that's sort of, not atypical for what we see from learners using the platform, which is that as they practice more times, they're able to accomplish more objectives in the conversation, and their turns per minute goes up. So we set as a target mastery score of 100%, it is possible, particularly possible for native speakers, to get above 100%. Basically, the 100% is what we set based on the analysis of the data we collect. What is a reasonable target for students at this level to aim at? If they can do even better, well, so much the better. The number of turns per minute, what's appropriate, of course, depends upon the particular conversation, the particular situation. Now, I talked about language errors, and so we also have exercises that really focus on accuracy of language so that the accuracy is not suffering compared to the fluency. And these target a lot of the problems that we see intermediate level learners encountering. So, intermediate level learners, if you work with them, they often are able to communicate simple ideas in a straightforward way, but if you give them a question that requires them to use an unusual sentence structure or grammatical structure, then they fall off the deep end. So here, for example, is an example of the type of question that a lot of our intermediate learners get stuck on. So ask the clerk what floor your room is on. Okay, learner said, what floor my room is on? No, that's not the way you would say it. You would say, what floor is my room on? So we see that a lot of learners at this level get stuck with these types of word orders. So this allows us to then focus in on the areas where learners need to improve, so they will continue to improve. I'll give you just a couple of examples before we continue of just sort of illustrating how students interact with the platform. I've shown you some screenshots, but it helps to see students actually interacting with it. So these happen to be beginner level students.
Hi, Emma.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How can I help you today?
I would like some to play for the party.
Well, you've come to the right place. Oh, and it looks like you have a list.
So you see a student can really engage in a conversation on their laptop computer or on their mobile device.
Hi, Owen. Hi, thanks for coming over. Thank you for inviting me. So, I'm going to have a party at the new pizza place downtown. I need to plan it out. Can you help me? Oh yeah, of course.
So for some reason, there are lots of barking dogs in these in the background of these recordings. But so what you see here is that learners, they get to practice outside of the classroom at a time that's convenient to them, so that when they do come back to class, when they come to class, they are prepared. And so this is one of the things that teachers really pointed out to us that have been using Enskill today. So now I'll say a little bit more in more depth of what we've done to support intermediate learners at what's the B level in the Common European Framework of Reference, or CEFR. And the way we do this is, as I said, we collect data from learners using the system, and then we analyze that data to understand how the AI technology needs to be improved, and we can actually use that data as training data to improve the technology. That's one of the real benefits of AI-based learning tools, is that they benefit from retraining with additional data. And we we published a journal paper on this. If you're interested, I can give you a link to it, as well as a patent pending for this technology and approach. And as I said, we're constantly collecting examples of accuracy problems that that learners are having. Here's a whole bunch of grammar errors from students at the B1 level. So you see, again, WH, or questions with embedded clauses are problems with these learners, like how many bedroom apartment has. These particular learners still had problems with articles, particles. So it's good to look at the published studies of what learners at different levels do, but it's even better, we find, to actually look at what the data tells us in terms of where students are having difficulty. As we said a moment ago in Jack Richards' study, that students, they get stuck in using fossilized incorrect grammatical forms. Well, here we can see examples of them, so we know where to focus in and help learners. The work that we do is aligned with the CEFR, our English content, but in particular, we align it with CanDo statements at each of the CEFR levels. So the idea is that if the student can complete the conversation successfully, then they really can do what the CanDo statement says. And we think that this is important for throughout, but I think it's really important to get students past the intermediate learning plateaus, so that it counteracts the sense that they're not making progress, that they're getting stuck, that they can see, well, in fact, I am making progress, because look, there are all these different CanDo statements that I have mastered. So I'll show you here some data that we collected from a study of B1 level learners. This was at the University of Split in Croatia. These learners, they were able to pass an exam to get into a B1 level course, but they were still having problems with spoken English. And so we gave them A-level simulations to try, and we found that the practice was beneficial for them. And we could see that in terms of how their performance increased over time. So as students practice multiple times, we can compare, for example, the first time through a simulation, on average, how many conversational exchanges per minute. That was started at 3.37. By the time they're done practicing, that had gone up to 4.26. We looked at the number of meaningful conversational exchanges, where I mean exchanges that don't involve things like, sorry, I don't understand, or could you repeat, or something like that. That as learners practiced, they had more meaningful exchanges per conversation, so up to an average of 14. So again, this shows how, as with practice, fluency improves. So then, to continue to support learners in progression, we saw that, well, now what we need to do is to actually improve our natural language processing technology, the AI technology, so that it can recognize the intended meaning of each learner's utterance. This is important to carry on the conversation, but also to recognize elements of structured arguments. As we said, learners need to be able to employ delivery structures. They need to be able to put their ideas together in a structured way. And so we developed a method for being able to detect elements of arguments and seeing whether they fit together. And also evaluate the manner of language use. And this includes, but is not limited to, grammatical forms. We're looking at questions like, is the learner presenting their ideas persuasively? Are they speaking politely at an appropriate register? So evaluating how the learner is presenting their ideas and making sure that they are being done appropriately. And again, we have a patent pending for this new capability, which I'll demonstrate for you in just a moment. So what we've done is we've created a pilot course in effective and persuasive communication. The particular application is in business English, but a similar approach could be used for academic English. And this relates to the important CEFR B2 CanDo of can express ideas and opinions with precision, present and respond to complex lines of argument convincingly. This is now what we are able to use AI technology to do. So I will now switch over actually to a bit of a demonstration of how this works. So here is the effective and persuasive communication course. And so there are a couple of different modules here. First, the learner practices using different delivery structures and also using persuasive language. And then once they've done that practice, then they put that together into an ongoing interactive presentation. So here, for example, the instructions are: use persuasive language to recommend partnering with an experienced company. Okay, so basically this is part of a scenario where you're going to present to your manager your ideas of how your company should improve its training program. So I could try various things. I could say, oh, we don't need a partner. We can do the work ourselves. So that is not a good answer. So let's see, recommending partnering with an experienced company. How about if maybe we partner with an experienced company? So I proposed next steps, but I didn't use persuasive language. I used various expressions that people often use colloquially, but they're not appropriate in getting your message across clearly. You know, how about if maybe we partner with an experienced company? So let me make the case more convincingly. I've identified a company that has a lot of experience in this area. I recommend we bring them in for a presentation. Okay, so it has identified that I've got the point across and that I've also used persuasive language. And you see the importance of this, that I'm not reading off of a script. I'm actually using language like you would use in real life, and I'm getting scored on how well I am using that language. So now let me segue to a conversation where we can actually, I can actually try using these skills. So, So here, what I'm doing, I'm playing an HR specialist in this company. I'm meeting with a couple of other people. One is my manager, and the other is a colleague who would like to take over my job. So my manager is going to ask me some questions of what I have in mind in terms of an approach. I need to use persuasive language, and I also need to use a delivery structure. And the particular delivery structure that the learner is practicing here is one of present your vision, describe the benefits, and then propose next steps. So let me first try doing it in an unpersuasive way.
Alex, I'd like to hear your ideas about how to revamp HR training.
How about if we look into AI-based training?
That's a really good idea. I've seen some AI demos at trade shows.
Alex, why do you think it would make such a difference?
Personally, I think it's really cool.
I've been hearing about using AI in training. Travis, what kind of demos have you seen at trade shows?
I've tried several, but the one I liked best was where I could role play scenarios with an avatar and get feedback on what I said. We could deploy this for way cheaper than sending all the branches for live HR training.
Great. What's our next step?
Would you like to maybe set up some meetings?
Yeah, that sounds like something to look into. Travis, you met a lot of these companies. Bring me some of those leads.
There are a couple of local companies that would make good partners for this. I'll make some calls and set up some meetings.
Thanks, Travis. Just put them on my calendar.
Sounds good.
And Alex, I'll get back to you about this. Good meeting.
Okay, so you see, this was very much a conversation at a high intermediate level, but I really bombed out on this. In fact, my use of persuasive language was not good at all. And a part of that was saying things like, how about if maybe we do this, or phrase my ideas as a question or as a personal opinion. And I didn't do a good job of getting my ideas across. So yeah, so I did mention, okay, AI-based training was cool, but I didn't explain the benefits. I didn't discuss next steps, and I didn't use persuasive language. So I need to do some more practice in order to get better at this. Karen, any comments, anything you'd like to add before I show them the right way to do it?
No, just that I think don't get fooled, I guess, by the fact that Travis seemed to have a lot more language. You can also get the same point across with fewer sentences and less language. It just so happened Travis responded in a sort of with multiple sentences. But I don't want people to confuse quantity with quality, I guess is what I would say.
Okay. So let me now replay the conversation, and I'll show you how to do it right.
Alex, I'd like to hear your
one way to do
ideas
it right.
about how to revamp HR training.
I recommend we look into AI-based training. It could have a big impact on our HR training program.
That's a really good idea. I've seen some AI demos at trade shows.
Alex, why do you think it would make such a difference?
Well, first, it has lower cost than conventional classroom training, and research shows that it yields better long-term learning outcomes.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Great. What's our next step?
I've identified a company that's got a lot of experience in this area. I recommend we bring them in for a presentation.
Interesting. Alex, why don't you recommend a company and arrange for them to come in to do a presentation? Good meeting.
So we'll see the score, and actually I got a very good score this time. So I think it should be clear to you, I was not reading, from a script here. I was just conveying my ideas as I think they should be presented. And the technology is up to the point now where it can successfully recognize a wide range of learner inputs and give meaningful feedback to help learners to improve. So now let me go back to the presentation. I think we're, I'll just, there's a couple things before we quit. So I talked about persuasive versus non-persuasive language, and here are some examples of the kinds of things that AI is looking for, or both positive and negative. We saw some examples of practice, and then how this works in practice. So here's where we're at. We now have offering this, if anybody wants to try out this pilot course with their students at the intermediate level, we're welcome to let them do it. It will help the learners, and would also give us more data so that we can improve our AI models. We're also interested in hearing from teachers what skills, can-dos they would like us to be sure to address. I mean, as I said, we collect data ourselves, but we also are very much interested in the insights of teachers, where they think students get stuck. What are the learning plateaus that they observe? So then we plan to use that data and then use that to then further extend the content and improve the technology. So that's the end of our presentation. And by the way, there is my email address. If you have follow-on questions, you can that you don't think about now, happy to take them up by email. But in the meantime, let me respond to some of the questions that people have raised. And if you have other questions, do bring them up. So one question is, what are the mechanisms you use to build teachers and students' trust in the AI expertise? So I would say that I think the key thing is to, as I showed you, to present summaries of the analyses so that the teachers can see more clearly what how the system is analyzing the learner's performance. I think what we found is that once we make the analytics available to teachers, it gives them greater confidence that the system is actually providing good feedback. And then the other thing is, let students and teachers try it out, and as they get work with it, then they get a better sense of what its strengths and limitations are, with the understanding that, of course, those limitations, as we recognize them, then we work to surpass them.
And Louis, if I could just add to that.
Please.
I think if I'm thinking about it from a student's perspective, generally the generation that we are focusing on, interestingly enough, doesn't seem to question that much the ability of AI to function. People don't ask about, is Siri accurate or is Alexa accurate? So I think from a student perspective, if you're a digital native, you've grown up in a lot of cases with technology, and you have this, right or wrong, a trust in what technology offers. I think from a teacher perspective, I'll kind of toot Louis's horn a little bit, and Louis has been in this field for many years, has presented and published widely. And if you look up Louis and see his reputation and of Louis himself, as well as the work that Alelo has done, I think that you'll feel confident that what has been built is trustworthy. But I think it's a very valid question, because there is a feeling that can we or can we not trust AI, probably fueled by too many Hollywood movies.
That's right. I think it's important as teachers to make sure that that the students are prepared for this kind of conversational experience. What our data tells us, and it's no surprise, is that real beginners who have no knowledge of English, they struggle a little bit and need some help. Now, once they get going a little bit, then they're perfectly fine, and that's something we'll be looking at for the future. But it is important that the students are at a point where they can take the best advantage of the capability. So a couple other questions that came on. So how easy is it to add a new conversation? So we have tools for authoring new conversations. Right now, we have not yet released those for use by the public, but that is our intention to do so, so that people can basically graph out their own conversations. Basically, what it requires is a conversational structure, which as I say, we graph out, and then lots and lots of example data of what the avatar and what the learner might say in each conversational turn. Some of that, fortunately, can be captured, as I said, by the platform itself. Get students on it to try it out, see what they say, and then use that to collect training data. So that works out pretty well. So let's see, another question from Ben Duboulay, and thank you, Ben, for attending. Ben happens to be a regular attendee of our webinars. He asked, does your system have specific techniques to deal with the slow and fractured delivery of intermediate students beyond providing them more practice and building their confidence? And I would say at this point, only at the high level. In other words, fractured delivery is reflected in the overall aggregate turns per minute score. So if we see that there's a low turns per minute, then that can be indication of disfluency. We have not yet provided specific feedback on overcoming that, other than just keep practicing and get comfortable doing it. And in my opinion, that's really the most important thing. Simply giving students opportunity to continue to practice in a safe environment, give them feedback that is unthreatening, like these mastery scores that encourage them to continue. I think that's the most important thing. Now, what I do envision going forward is, you saw some examples there of AI detectors called classifiers for different types of language problems. So in this case, persuasive versus unpersuasive language. I really see that as being just a starting point for a range of different analyzers that we could put into the system that could detect different types of problems and disfluencies and provide more meaningful and focused feedback. So I see that as being really just an ongoing progression for the work that we do. Any other questions? Okay, well, very good. So like I said, if people have additional questions, happy to follow up with you, hear your ideas of what problems your learners encounter, and see what we can do to help them overcome them and continue to make progress to proficiency. So thanks again, everybody. When we are done, we will post this recording to YouTube, and make that available. So visit our website. If anybody missed this presentation live, they can go and view the recording later. So thanks, everybody. And thanks, Karen, for collaborating with me on
No,
this.
thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hope to hear from each of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.